Okay, good evening everybody and welcome to this meeting tonight. It's titled Solidarity with Cuba, 60 Years of Blockade and Intervention. My name is Rob Miller and I'm the director here of the Cuba Solidarity Campaign in Britain, and I'll be chairing tonight's meeting. I'd especially like to welcome everyone here tonight, including all the British trade unions and their members who are watching. And I know this meeting is taking place after or during TUC Congress, and as we're online this year, Congress is online too. This rally is to coincide with Congress. We've got a wonderful lineup of speakers and messages, including Her Excellency Barbara Montalvo, the Cuban ambassador, who's joining us tonight, and also our good friend Navendu Mishra, who's the Member of Parliament for Stockport, who's going to be joining with us a bit later on in the meeting. Before I start the meeting, I just want to go through the format. Please use the Q&A box if you want to say hello, let us know you're here, or if you want to post any comments at all. As many of you here tonight will have been at TUC Congress all day, we're going to keep tonight's rally short and certainly hope to finish within the hour. So I hope you'll stay with us. I want to begin tonight's meeting by introducing our first two speakers. Firstly, I'd like to introduce Diana Holland, who is the national chairperson of the Cuba Solidarity Campaign. And then Diana will be followed by Ulises de Nacimiento Guilarte, who is the General Secretary of the CTC, the Cuban Workers Central, which is the equivalent of our own TUC. The CTC represents around 4 million Cuban workers. Many of you will remember him from a couple of years ago when Ulises was a special guest at the TUC in Brighton, where he received a wonderful standing ovation from all the delegates for his barnstorming speech then. Both Diana and Ulises have recorded messages for tonight's meeting in advance, so you'll see them one after another. So here we go with Diana first and then Ulises.
Good evening. I'm Diana Holland, Unite Assistant General Secretary and Chair of the Cuba Solidarity Campaign. On behalf of CSC, thank you all for joining us for this online rally. Of course, in usual times, we're able to get together for our rally, and the last time we were able to do this was in 2019 at the TUC Congress in Brighton, when we were celebrating 60 years of the Cuban Revolution and the achievements in health, in education, and in internationalism. We were also able to be joined by Ulises, General Secretary of the Cuban Federation of Trade Unions, and he was also the international speaker at the TUC Congress that year. So it is a great honour that Ulises, together with Santiago and Niurka, are able to join with us by sending messages to this online rally from the CTC and from the health and education unions. How things have changed. At that time, we could not have imagined they could have got worse. But Trump, in his last days, was using the pandemic to impose further sanctions on Cuba. He placed the island on the US list of state sponsors of terrorism and also introduced 50 new sanctions under COVID alone. Cuba relies so much on tourism for its economy, and so the impact over the last 18 months has been devastating. In 2020, the blockade prevented the delivery of life-saving PPE, of ventilators, and of COVID testing kits. In spite of Cuba developing its own vaccines, Cuban scientists are clear that shortages caused by the blockade delayed the vaccine rollout programme. And in addition, food and general medicine shortages have caused real hardship and suffering for many people. We have also been watching in alarm as US politicians have been calling for military intervention in Cuba. We know from the history of Latin America, from Guatemala in 1954 to Chile in 1973, just what that intervention can mean. The intervention we need is the ending of the blockade so that Cuban people can live their lives as they should be able to. And the overwhelming majority of the world agrees. At the United Nations, again this year, 184 countries voted to end the blockade, while just 2 opposed the motion. We need to come together, and I want to thank all those politicians who've signed early day motions and petitions calling on President Biden to now make good on his campaign pledges about ending the blockade. And also to thank all of you who've taken part in CSC's more than 20 online activities, and also when you could, to come together in the caravans in person, all calling for the end of the blockade. When it was first introduced 60 years ago next year, we found it was calling for weakening the economic life of Cuba and bringing about hunger, desperation, and overthrow of government. That's not what we need in this world today. We need a different solution. We need the kind of solidarity and support that's been shown through all of you with the solidarity support. For example, the COVID-19 medical aid appeal for Cuba has raised an amazing £95,000, which has assisted in sending aid over the last 6 months to help treat COVID patients and roll out the vaccination programme across the island. Thank you so much to all trade unions for their solidarity and their affiliation to CSC. And if you aren't affiliated, or any organisations that could, please affiliate and join up. And as individuals too, your support is so appreciated, so welcomed and so needed. So very best wishes for the rally. And let's continue.
Estimadas delegadas, delegados e invitados, desde Cuba, bastión de resistencia y combate permanente por su derecho a la independencia y soberanía nacional, le transmitimos el saludo fraterno y militante de la Central de Trabajadores de Cuba y sus sindicatos nacionales, a los líderes y organizaciones sindicales que participan en este Congreso de los Sindicatos Británicos. El TUC y la SNTECD han mantenido históricas relaciones de amistad, solidaridad y cooperación en ámbitos de interés y beneficio mutuo, sustentadas en el compromiso por alcanzar una efectiva articulación de las acciones en defensa de los derechos de los trabajadores. La pandemia mundial por la COVID-19, unido al injusto orden económico internacional, han generado negativos impactos en el mundo del trabajo. Se anteponen los intereses económicos del sector empresarial a la voluntad política de salvar vidas humanas ante el colapso de los sistemas sanitarios de salud. Se ha multiplicado el desempleo y la precariedad de los contratos como consecuencia de la paralización o reducción de la actividad productiva y los servicios, quedando cientos de miles de trabajadores sin ninguna garantía o prestación social. Cuba continúa enfrentando los efectos del criminal bloqueo económico, comercial y financiero que nos impone el gobierno norteamericano, recrudecido con la aplicación de 243 nuevas medidas. A ello se suma una campaña de manipulación mediática que incita a disturbios y acciones vandálicas contra la infraestructura económica del país, la que ha encontrado refugio en la mayoría de nuestro pueblo y en las múltiples muestras de la solidaridad internacional. Bajo este complejo y desafiante escenario, continuamos los trabajadores cubanos avanzando en la actualización de nuestro modelo económico de desarrollo socialista. Se otorgan nuevas facultades y autonomía a la empresa estatal socialista y al mismo tiempo crece el sector privado con la incorporación de pequeñas y medianas empresas. Del mismo modo, se aplican protecciones salariales a los trabajadores del sector del turismo, el artístico, el transporte y el comercio ante la paralización de sus actividades. Estimados dirigentes sindicales, en Cuba tenemos una alta valoración del liderazgo y el papel del TUC dentro del movimiento sindical internacional. Les deseamos el mayor de los éxitos en los debates y acuerdos del Congreso. Les ratifico que siempre podrán contar con la voz sincera y el combate de Cuba frente a la injusticia, la defensa de la paz y los derechos de los trabajadores. ¡Viva la solidaridad internacional! ¡Hasta la victoria siempre!
Well, thank you so much to Diana, and of course to Ulises, our good friend there in Havana. It's wonderful to see Ulises, and we hope to see him in person here again in the UK, or perhaps in Cuba soon. So thank you. I know Diana mentioned the Cuba Solidarity Campaign's medical appeal for Cuba in her contribution. We launched the appeal in April, our COVID-19 appeal. And so far we've raised almost £100,000, which has been absolutely brilliant. And we've managed to make a number of purchases from Germany, from Switzerland and from China to send directly medical materials and aid to Cuba to help with the treatment of COVID patients, but also to help in Cuba's wonderful vaccine rollout program. And that's included raw materials, syringes, cryotubes, serum products, and so on to help in that program. So a massive thanks to anyone here tonight who has already donated to that appeal. I know lots of trade unions, branches and regions and national unions have also donated. But if you would like to find out more or to donate, then there is information about that appeal in the chat box. I'd now like to introduce our next three speakers, in fact, in one go, messages again. Firstly, from Mariella Cohen, who is the Senior International Officer at the TUC. From Dave Ward, the General Secretary of the Communication Workers Union. And from Tony Woodhouse, who is the Chairperson of Unite the Union's Executive Committee. So a big welcome to all three of those. Before they speak, however, and by way of introduction to the three of them, we're just going to show a very short film. It's only 1.5 minutes long, which was produced earlier in the year by Oxfam, the International Development Agency. Oxfam produced a wonderful report in May this year, which looked at the impact of the United States blockade on Cuba, on the lives in particular of women and girls. And over 68% of them have, in fact, were born after the blockade or under the blockade, which in itself has been in place now for 6 decades, for 60 years. The first film we're going to show another one later because they are brilliant little films, is about women in agriculture and the impact on them of the blockade. And if you haven't seen the Oxfam report itself, then I would urge you to try and access it. There's some great documents and information there, facts and figures, and a good summary document too. The report is titled The Right to Live Without Blockade. And you can find a link to that report in the chat box and also on the Cuba Solidarity Campaign website. And it's all about the best ways to improve the lives of women, but also all Cubans. That the best way to improve their lives is to lift the US blockade of Cuba. So we're going to see the film and then we're going to hear from those three speakers. Thank you.
Las mujeres tenemos y desarrollamos todos los días una capacidad inventiva y una capacidad de resiliencia y de adaptación a los cambios que tenemos que enfrentar. Desde mis inicios laborales estoy vinculada en el sector agropecuario. Tienes que poner una manguera, poner un pedazo de corté, un pedazo de nylon, lo vuelve a unir y aún así mira la fuga de agua que tenemos. La agricultura lleva un deterioro continuo y junto con ella incluso un deterioro del medio ambiente. Es uno de los sectores más golpeados por el bloqueo. Comercializar con los países de América Latina siendo un mercado tan cercano se nos hace imposible prácticamente debido a la característica extraterritorial que tiene el bloqueo. Si no existiera el bloqueo, el índice de productividad y el índice de rendimiento aumentaría. La economía no solo se afecta a nivel nacional, afecta a nivel personal cada una de las casas donde vivimos. Tengo 31 años y hace 60 años vivimos bajo las injustas leyes que nos impone un bloqueo que intenta asfixiarnos.
I'm Mariella Cohen. I'm the Senior International Officer at the TUC, and it's my pleasure on behalf of the TUC to support this Fringe and send our message of solidarity and greetings to all of those watching the Fringe and also taking part, such as the Ambassador, Barbara and Ulises from the CTC. We have long-standing policy to reject and condemn the ongoing blockade, which causes so much suffering to the Cuban people. We were so pleased to be able to host the leadership of the CTC during our Congress in 2019, where Ulises was our guest speaker, and to welcome various comrades in November of that year during the trade union tour. At that Congress, we passed a motion congratulating Cuba on the 60th anniversary of the revolution and congratulating the CTC on its 80th anniversary. We also condemned the measures that were taken by the US administration under Trump to tighten the blockade and cause so much suffering to the Cuban people. We send all our sisters and brothers in Cuba our solidarity and admiration for their dignified struggle. We are so inspired by all your advances in education and health, in welfare, in women's representation, and in international humanitarianism, all achieved despite the inhumane blockade. We watched how Cuba sent health workers around the world during this pandemic. I've also personally had the privilege of working with Cuban government representatives in the peace process in Colombia and saw firsthand the role that they've played in supporting peace. Cuba really sets an example of what true internationalism and true solidarity looks like. I also want to pay tribute to the Cuba Solidarity Campaign for their tireless work to raise awareness about the truth of what is happening and to build those links of friendship between British trade unionists and Cuban trade unionists. We joined the international community who called for an end to the blockade at the UN General Assembly earlier this year with an overwhelming amount of votes against the blockade. And we look forward to continuing to build our relationship with the CTC and with the Cuban people and build on those years of friendship and solidarity. Viva Cuba!
Hi comrades, it's really good to be able to give this short message to all of those who support the Cuban Solidarity Campaign. My name's Dave Wall, General Secretary of the CWU, and we're proud to be affiliated to the campaign. In my time as General Secretary, I've had the privilege of meeting a number of Cuban trade union leaders, and all of them are inspirational in the way that you take on the challenges that you face for far too long. 2022 will be 60 years of the unjustified, completely inhumane blockade of the US of Cuba. And, you know, my message is very simple. Biden, he made his promises when he stood for election, and he needs to be held to account for fulfilling those promises. And as a trade union movement, my other message is very simple. We don't wait for politicians to change things. This is something that I think increasingly across the world, more important than ever, is our international solidarity. Workers cut across all national boundaries, borders, and our job is to work together to bring about a shift in the balance of forces. And no more in the world is that more needed than in Cuba. So you have the support of the CWU. We want to continue to work with the campaign, and we wish you a very productive meeting. and hope to see you face to face very soon. Thanks very much.
Hello colleagues, my name is Tony Woodhouse and it's my privilege to be the chair of the Unite Executive Council. I want to send my solidarity greetings today, not just to Cuba Solidarity, but also to the Cuban and Union movement from Unite. We have a great history of internationalism in my union, from the Transport and General Workers Union sending ambulances and else equipment to support for freedom, to the support for the freedom of the Miami 5, and continuing exchanges between British and Cuban workers, including young members doing voluntary work on brigades. I've seen firsthand the brilliant medical and education systems that they have in Cuba, but I've also seen the damage the blockade doing, especially during this pandemic, which to me, the Americans have blood on their hands. Unite calls for the end of the blockade and will do everything they can in their power to support not just Cuba Solidarity, but the people of Cuba. And we stand alongside them and will do everything we can to stop this blockade. Comrades, I hope your meeting goes well. Thank you very much.
Well, brilliant messages. So a huge thank you to Mariella from the TUC, Dave Ward from the CW, and Tony Woodhouse from Unite. They're brilliant messages, and we're so pleased to have received those for this meeting. Our next two speakers are from British and Cuban unions. First is going to be from Santiago, BADIA Gonzalez, who is the General Secretary of a very important union at this time, the Health Workers Union in Cuba. And BADIA will be followed by Zita Holborn, who's the Vice President of the Public and Commercial Services Union here. So I'd like to give a really special thanks to Santiago BADIA for sending his message, because he is currently himself at home suffering from COVID-19. So we really appreciate BADIA recording this message for us. And of course, we all wish him a very speedy recovery. So we're going to hear from BADIA and from Zita now.
Un saludo a los sindicatos británicos que unidos por el TUC desarrollan su congreso. Desde el Sindicato Nacional de Trabajadores de la Salud de Cuba, agradecer la oportunidad de dirigirme a ustedes, sindicato que siempre ha recibido la mano solidaria, amiga de los sindicatos de Inglaterra, Unison, sobre todo la región Londres y otras regiones que se han sumado a este gran sindicato, a los ambulancieros de Londres que siempre han estado ahí con esa mano amiga, solidaria. Nos viene siempre a la mente que la relación de casi 30 años con los sindicatos británicos y nada, agradecerles la oportunidad de dirigirme a ustedes. Hace alrededor de 30 años ustedes burlaban el bloqueo que nos impone el gobierno de los Estados Unidos y apoyaban con ambulancias, con medios informáticos, con medios de comunicación para desarrollar el sistema de urgencias médicas de nuestro país, donde ustedes son pioneros y tienen una alta resolutividad. Nosotros decir que contamos con más de 450.000 afiliados en Cuba a este gran sindicato, es el segundo sindicato más grande que tiene nuestro país y que apuesta por un mundo mejor y que es posible, con una terrible pandemia que azota a la humanidad, que ha cobrado miles de muertos aquí en nuestro país, millones en el mundo, y que seguimos enfrentando con limitaciones de recursos financieros, materiales, pero con mucho deseo de querer hacer y de seguir aportando a la ciencia. Con un sindicato que se suma también los científicos nuestros, que han ya aportado 5 candidatos vacunales, de ellos ya 2 vacunas aprobadas para el uso de emergencia. Recién vamos a comenzar también la vacunación a los infantes nuestros niños, y nada, seguimos apostando por nuestra vacuna, la soberana, y seguimos haciendo revolución. Decirles además que seguimos aportando nuestra brigada. En esta terrible pandemia hemos aportado 57 brigadas a 40 países. Le agradecemos también el apoyo incondicional que nos han prestado relacionado con la nominación al Premio Nobel de la Paz de nuestra brigada, y que ustedes siempre han defendido con alevosía, con deseo de que se haga justicia. Realmente no esperábamos tal distinción o tal nominación, pero nuestra brigada lo merece porque es el reconocimiento del mundo entero hacia ese apoyo solidario. Desde ya les deseamos un congreso exitoso. Sé que van a discutir los principales problemas relacionados con los sindicalistas británicos, sus principales planteamientos, y será todo un éxito, como ustedes acostumbran, con la organización, con esa cultura del detalle que le caracteriza a los sindicalistas británicos. Un fuerte abrazo solidario. Desde ya le auguro el éxito en el Congreso, y lo seguiremos desde aquí de su hermano país Cuba. Un abrazo. El Sindicato de Trabajadores de la Salud de Cuba, con su membresía, les desea el mejor de los congresos y éxito en el Congreso del TUC. Hasta la victoria siempre. Seguiremos en combate y hermanados. Un fuerte abrazo desde Cuba, desde el Sindicato Nacional de Trabajadores de la Salud.
Greetings, my name is Zita Holborn, and I'm the National Vice President of the Public and Commercial Services Union, PCS, in the UK. I send a message of greetings to everybody attending this meeting, and greetings in solidarity to our sister Cuban trade unions and the CTC. As we approach nearly 60 years, PCS stand with Cuba in calling for an end to the blockade. As a member of the Caribbean community and the Caribbean diaspora, I am fully aware of the important role that Cuba plays in bringing solidarity, not just symbolic, but practical solidarity, to the rest of the Caribbean and other Caribbean nations. This has become more apparent during the pandemic over the last 18 months, with over 450 Cuban medics working with other Caribbean countries to treat those who were the victims of coronavirus and to literally save lives. But this support in the medical profession and training of medical professionals across the Caribbean has been happening for many, many years. Also, I must pay tribute to our Cuban sisters and brothers for the work that they have done in bringing practical support to the people of Haiti. The people of Haiti, as you will know, have gone through trauma and turmoil over many, many years. And that includes the horrific earthquake that took place just last month in August. And Cuban medics were already in Haiti on a medical mission when the earthquake struck, so they were able to give immediate support. But that relationship of giving support to the people of Haiti by Cuba has been there for many, many years. 60 years is far too long. The blockade must end, and we must pay tribute and acknowledge the tremendous efforts of the Cuban people, of Cuban communities, of Cuban trade unionists and of Cuban workers for standing in solidarity with others, in particular those from other Caribbean nations throughout that whole entire 60 years. We stand with you, Cuba. Solidarity. Viva Cuba.
Brilliant. Thank you, Zita, for that wonderful message, illustrating the wonderful international humanitarian solidarity from Cuba to countries around the globe. It really has been a wonderful miracle to witness over the past 18 months. And a big thank you to BADIA, of course, and I hope, BADIA, when you watch this, you'll accept our best wishes for a speedy recovery from COVID-19 as soon as possible. So thank you both. I would take this opportunity to ask anyone here tonight, just before I ask the Cuban ambassador to say a few words, I'd like to appeal to you, if you're not already a member of the Cuba Solidarity Campaign, or your union branch or region is not affiliated to the Cuba Solidarity Campaign, then I hope that you will consider joining or affiliating tonight if you can. And there are links in the chat box for that right now. You get a wonderful bag and some badges, but above all, you also receive our magazine Cuba C 4 times a year. But above all, you'll be helping the people of Cuba, and joining the campaign is really the first step and the most important step in showing your solidarity with the people of Cuba. So if you can join, please do so. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce our next speaker tonight, who is Her Excellency Barbara Montalvo Alvarez. Barbara, it's great that you can join with us tonight, and the floor is yours. So Barbara.
Dear friends, many thanks for the invitation to this online rally. First of all, I want to reiterate to the Trade Union Congress and British trade unions our profound gratitude for the support and solidarity with Cuban people and Cuban workers offered throughout so many years. It has been especially valued during the pandemic and in this particular and complex moment. Cuba is facing the second wave of the COVID since the beginning of this year. We continue making huge efforts to save life under very hard conditions. The Cuban National Regulatory Agency certified 3 homegrown vaccines against the coronavirus used in an emergency protocol, making Cuba the first Latin American country to develop a successful COVID-19 vaccine. By September 10th, 57% of the Cuban population had received at least 1 dose, and 37% were fully vaccinated. It's interesting that the vaccination rate in the world is 0.40, and in Cuba is 1.73. As you know, we began the vaccinate maybe 2 months or less ago. This achievement is also the result of the contribution from people all around the world, and in particular from British friends who sent medical supplies for clinical trials and vaccination program. It's only an example about how important is the solidarity for Cuba. We are facing the pandemic in a context of an unprecedented tightening of the blockade. In times of COVID-19, a key element is to obtain the necessary supplies in order to face this disease. Since 2019, Cuba has tried to contract various mechanical ventilation equipment used in intensive care units, and later so necessary in the context of the pandemic. After months of attempts to buy from a European company, the license has expired and we didn't succeed in the purchase. So we have had to face the pandemic with that great limitation. The aid sent from China could not reach Cuban soil because the cargo transport company refused to load it for fear of being punished by US law. It has sometimes been alleged that the US authorizes the sale if Cuba requests a license. No one who knows how international trade works can assume that problems will be solved urgently through the deliberately lengthy process if you need a license. If the US did not impose restrictions, it would not require licenses, nor would include medicines and food within the limitations for Cuba to buy in the US or in third markets. On the other hand, Cuba cannot access products that contain more than 10% of US components, raw materials, parts, software, and intellectual property. In an economy as globalized as the current one, it is very, very difficult to find products with such requirement. Cuba cannot trade with US subsidiaries based in third countries, even if they respond to the legislation, pay taxes, and employ personnel from the nations where they are based. Nothing has changed with the new administration. On September 7th, President Biden extended the law serving as the basis of the US blockade for another year. These sanctions, all of these sanctions, have represented a real obstacle to the procurement of mechanical ventilators, face masks, diagnostic kits, reagents, vaccination syringe, and other necessary materials to address COVID-19. Our organization supports the campaign for a people's vaccine that is free and accessible as soon as possible to everyone, everywhere. And this is not my statement. It is Oxfam's. Cuba is developing 5 of its own vaccine candidates. Yet, by blocking trade and commercial transactions, the US blockade is delaying widespread vaccination on the island. This is not my statement. It is Oxfam's. The embargo against Cuba has achieved nothing throughout the decades of its existence beyond contributing to human suffering. This is not my statement. It's Health Tells, president of the Washington Office on Latin America, a leading human rights organization that has focused on US-Cuban policy since the 1990s. We highly value the motion that the Trade Union Congress passed in 2019, calling for a reversal of the additional sanctions applied by the Trump administration. For all those that have supported the medical appeal of the Cuban Solidarity Campaign, our deep gratitude. A hand generously and respectfully extended is shaken with gratitude and commitment. I wish you the best of success in your Congress. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Barbara, for those lovely words. It's thank you again, and I'll refer to some of the points you made in a minute. But I just want to bring in our next speaker because I know Nav Vendu Mishra, who's joined us, is expecting a vote in the Houses of Parliament any time. Nav is the MP for Stockport. He's a great friend of the Cuba Solidarity Campaign and the Cuban people. So Nav, if we can hear from you now, that would be wonderful. And it's we're so grateful you've managed to join us.
Good evening, everyone. I hope you can hear me. I've sort of got my phone propped up against a book here on the terrace, so I hope I can stay for the whole event. But thank you for having me. My special thanks to Cuba Solidarity Campaign for organizing this rally as part of the Trade Union Congress. It's so nice to see so many friends, comrades. The Cuban ambassador delivered a fantastic speech, and I had the privilege of going to Cuba in 2016 as a young Unite member. Unfortunately, I'm not very young now, but 5 years ago seems like a long time ago. And on that trip in 2016, obviously before COVID, it was a different world, and I had a really wonderful opportunity to meet Cuban people, do lots of visits with colleagues from Unite and other British trade unions and trade unions from other countries in the world. It's on my list of things to do is to organize another visit very soon, and hopefully in a post-COVID world, or at least a world with much higher vaccination rates, we'll be able to do that. Last year in November 2020, just after the American election results came in, I spoke at another event organized by British Cuba Solidarity Campaign, and we discussed the results of the US presidential elections and that hope that Joe Biden, the president-elect at the time, would deliver on his campaign pledge to sort of reverse the extra sanctions that were imposed by the former Trump regime. And the bottom line was that these sanctions were making the life very, very difficult for ordinary people. And it was, that hope sort of existed that Joe Biden would reverse a lot of the toxic sort of things that were being delivered by the Trump administration. But I'm very disappointed that President Biden hasn't delivered his promise to reverse these sanctions. In fact, actually, you could argue even more difficult with COVID and people facing real hardship, shortages with food, shortages with medicine, fuel, things that are necessary to survive today. And unfortunately, these sanctions make it very, very difficult. It seems that 50 out of the 243 extra sanctions that were imposed by the Trump regime were implemented during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, I always say this, regardless of whatever your on Cuba is, making life difficult for ordinary Cubans to access food, fuel, medicines is unacceptable. We should make that people have the necessary sort of requirements met, and especially in a pandemic. Cuba is a small country, and the ambassador mentioned that some of the aid that was being sent by other countries, shipping companies, were refusing to deliver that because of the sanctions that have been placed. And we don't have to sort of into the detail, but we know that our National Health Service in the UK has faced tremendous pressure when it comes to COVID. And actually, Cuba is a small country. The pressure was quite difficult as is with sanctions, but with regards to COVID, that's made things much worse. And Cuba is a country that relies on tourism. It also has an economy that's been sort of decimated due to COVID. Lots and lots of jobs, lots and lots of economy depends on tourism. And the ongoing loss of income has made things much, much worse. Now, I think next year, 2022, will be 6 years since these sanctions came in. And myself and several parliamentarians, pretty much all from Labour, we've been calling for action from the UK government. And I was incredibly proud to sign an early edition in February, which called on the American Biden administration to remove the island from its response to the terrorism list and normalize relations with Cuba. I was proud to support that, continue to call on the UK government to do more to support ordinary people in Cuba. The Biden administration, at the minimum, could have reversed those Trump sanctions, which prevent Cubans from living abroad, helping family members on Ireland by sending money, sending remittance. None of these things were done in the first 6 months of the Biden presidency, despite growing food prices and shortages in Cuba as a direct result of these policies. US policy towards Cuba is driven too much by politics of confrontation, personal interest, some people in Florida, and it would be much better that it was delivered by compassion and cooperation. Sanctions harm the ordinary Cuban people the most, and they alienate the US and the international community. And we know the United Nations General Assembly has held several votes on this issue. Most recently in June, where 180 countries voted to lift the blockade, the illegal blockade against Cuba. And unfortunately, only 2 countries voted against that motion. Our own experience in the UK is of cooperation and dialogue, and Prince Charles, regardless of your view on the royal family, Prince Charles visited a couple of years ago, I think it was 2019, and these sort of relations are beneficial to both countries, the UK and to Cuba. And in April 2020, Cuba provided safe docking for a COVID-stricken ship. I believe the cruise ship was called MS Bremer, and I believe that I was in the house in the chamber when the Foreign Secretary thanked the Cuban authorities for supporting that ship. And Cuban doctors provided medical support to lots and lots of countries, but particularly British overseas territories. And one of the 57 medical brigades that are working in across 40 countries to fight COVID-19. Cuba is a small country, but it does a lot when it comes to supporting other countries or perhaps more low and middle income countries. And to be fair to the UK government, UK has provided training and support and scholarship for people, for Cuban students studying in the UK, and that's a good. We need to build on that. But there's a lot more to be done. As I said, we need to end the illegal blockades. And as I said, I will continue to call on the UK government to do a lot more when it comes to supporting Cuba, when it comes to making sure that we have good relationship, but also that ordinary people in Cuba aren't deprived of food, medicines, and the shortage doesn't hit them. I hope you'll forgive me. I have to dash off. I've just had a text that said there's a vote anytime. But lovely to be here. My special thanks to everyone at Cuba Solidarity Campaign, Natasha, Rob, everyone else. And I hope next time we meet face to face, of course, over some rum, rather than on being stuck. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Brilliant, Nav. Thank you so much for taking the time. And it's lovely to see you there on the green outside the house or on the terrace. Thank you so much. And I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank Nav and Graham and all the members of the all-party parliamentary group on Cuba for their work over the past period. The early day motion 1550 was signed by nearly 60 members of parliament, which is an awful lot at this time. And they've also done much work in rallying support for Cuba in the letter writing campaign to Biden, and working across the House, across all parties, to generate support for a call for an end to the blockade and for better UK-Cuba relations. I'd also like to thank Barbara again for your speech. We ourselves have experienced difficulties in purchasing and sending the aid to Cuba. So we're beginning to learn a lot about the extraterritorial nature of the blockade. Of course, we've experienced it ourselves before with the closure of all Cuba Solidarity Campaign bank accounts by the Cooperative Bank here in the UK because of the extraterritorial application of the blockade. And over the past few months, we've really seen how difficult it is to transfer funds between banks, even between banks in the UK, with anything to do with Cuba. So the blockade is omnipresent, it's around us right now, and it's making it extremely difficult to provide medical resources to Cuba. We're doing our best and working very hard, and we can assure everybody that we are getting the aid to Cuba, but it is very, very complicated. Barbara touched on the difficulties in Cuba. There have been a lot of difficulties during the past period with COVID, with the economy, with the lack of tourism. And some of you I know have mentioned the protests in July, on July the 11th. We've compiled a huge resource, a lot of resources on that issue. We held a special video meeting on that very issue with speakers from Cuba and the UK, and links to all of those, that information in our alternative media base is on, or should be on the chat or the Q&A now, so that you can find out all the information about what is going on in Cuba right now in the face of COVID right now. So I'm going to move on swiftly to our final contributions this evening, which is from 2 more General Secretaries, one from Cuba and one from here, both from the teaching union. So I know have wonderful relations. So first of all, we're going to hear from a very good friend, Niurka Gonzalez Obera, the General Secretary of the Cuban Education Union, the SNTECD, and then from our very good friend, Kevin Courtney, who is the Joint General Secretary of the NEU and also the international spokesperson of the TUC. And after they have both spoken, we're going to see another of the short films from Oxfam, this time on the impact of the US blockade on women who are working in small craft industries in Cuba. Thank you.
Hola, desde el Sindicato Nacional de los Trabajadores de la Educación, la Ciencia y el Deporte en Cuba, nuestro saludo y el deseo de que el Congreso sea todo un éxito, que puedan debatir y llegar a acuerdos que beneficien a todos sus afiliados y trabajadores en los diferentes sectores. Por acá nos encontramos bien, como siempre, resistiendo a ese brutal, criminal bloqueo que nos impone el gobierno de los Estados Unidos por más de 60 años, que no han podido con nuestro pueblo ni podrán. Agradecerles de antemano vuestra solidaridad, vuestro apoyo y vuestra colaboración en la lucha que lleva el pueblo cubano, reitero, por más de 60 años, por eliminar ese brutal bloqueo que nos impone el gobierno de los Estados Unidos, que lo que quiere es doblegar a nuestro pueblo por hambre, y por supuesto no lo han podido hacer en más de 60 años ni lo van a poder hacer. Seguimos también combatiendo la pandemia contra la COVID-19 con nuestros 5 candidatos vacunales. Ya tenemos una gran mayoría de la población vacunada. Con relación a nuestro sindicato, debemos reiniciar el curso escolar la próxima semana a través de teleclase. Ya comenzará la vacunación también de nuestros niños y nuestros jóvenes para poder pasar a un curso presencial cuando las condiciones epidemiológicas lo permitan. Nada, una vez más, un fuerte abrazo, agradecer vuestro apoyo, su solidaridad, su colaboración. Esperamos que esto se mantenga por muchos años, muchos éxitos en sus congresos y un fuerte abrazo desde Cuba. Chao.
Hi, my name's Kevin Courtney and I'm the Joint General Secretary of the National Education Union, sending greetings to this online fringe meeting of the Cuba Solidarity Campaign at the TUC Congress 2021. Let's hope we can meet in person next year. I'm sending greetings to everyone at this meeting, and I'm sending greetings to the Cuban trades unionists who sent recorded messages, including the General Secretary of the Cuban Teachers Union. Now, during the last 12 years, my own union, the NEU, has had some online events. Amongst them, we've had online events which have celebrated the great Cuban literacy campaign of 60 years ago. In a fringe meeting at our own online congress in April, we actually had people who'd taken part in that great literacy campaign 60 years ago. They were very young people at that time. They left their homes in the cities. They went to the countryside, thousands of them, to teach the Cuban peasants to read and write. And that was maybe the first evidence of the commitment of that new Cuban government to work on health and education. And there's been 60 years of commitment in those areas since. And whatever else you think about Cuba, it is evidence that a government can prioritize health and education. That a government, even in the hardest circumstances, Cuba is a country in the global south, a poor country, but it's prioritized education. It has universal, free education, inclusive for all ages and all abilities. We've celebrated that literacy campaign during the last year. But next year, we're going to see another anniversary, another 60-year anniversary. The 60th anniversary of the illegal blockade of Cuba by the United States government. Voted against at the UN almost every year by a huge majority, but maintained illegally by the United States across that 60 years. And I have to say, maintained by Joe Biden, despite campaign promises that he was going to wind back some of the extra sanctions applied by the Trump government. Now, that illegal blockade makes it more difficult to deliver education and health. I'm really pleased, for example, that my union has worked on delivering refurbished Braille machines to schools for the visually impaired in Cuba, because it is so difficult for the Cubans to buy those in the international arena because of that blockade. The blockade affects health as well, and it's increased the difficulty that the Cuban people have faced because of COVID. The illegal blockade makes health and COVID's preparations all the more difficult. So I want to say to British trades unionists, to trades unionists around the world, that we have to step up our campaign against this illegal blockade. We have to say to Joe Biden that we want campaign promises met, but that we want that blockade to come down. The Cuban people must be able to decide their own future, and the blockade is an attempt to determine the future of the Cuban people by a form of blackmail. The blockade should come down. We should show solidarity with the Cuban people in calling for the blockade to come down. My own union will continue its delegations to Cuba. We were really pleased to have sent 2 container loads of musical instruments to Cuban education, refurbished instruments that weren't being used in schools here, that can be used in schools in Cuba, because even musical instruments come under the blockade. Down with the blockade, self-determination for the people of Cuba, solidarity to all of you in this meeting today. Let's work hard to bring down that blockade in its 60th year. Thank you.
La mujer cubana ha sido una mujer muy luchadora. Va a la calle y va pensando que lleva para la casa.
Junto a mi hermana y mi mamá llevamos este negocio familiar, Zul.
Zulu fue creado alrededor del año 1992. Nosotros decidimos que nos hacía falta incorporar otras actividades para ayudar a nuestra economía.
Todo surgió a partir de los materiales que teníamos y las ganas de crear. Un bolso que, por supuesto, a la mujer cubana de los 90 y de hoy le sigue funcionando muchísimo. El bolso Zulu representa precisamente lo cubano, por la durabilidad y la resistencia con que realmente tratamos de hacer y crear. Las afectaciones de las medidas de Trump al negocio ha incidido de forma directa porque han afectado la entrada al país de materia prima. Nos afectan tanto en la entrada de turismo, que son nuestros clientes potenciales, como la adquisición de materiales como la piel, los hilos, los herrajes, en fin, todos los materiales con que regularmente trabajamos.
Eso que los políticos dicen que nada más que se afecta al gobierno de Cuba es falso. Realmente nos afecta a todos.
Oh, brilliant. Great video as well. And if you haven't had a chance to see that report from Oxfam, the links are in the chat, and it is very, very well worth reading that report. Well, we're coming towards the end of our meeting. Just a few comments before I wrap up. If you have enjoyed tonight's meeting and you're able to help in any way at all, if you wanted to give a small donation to the Cuba Solidarity Campaign, we much appreciate it. It's been very difficult during COVID, obviously, for all organisations like ourselves, not being able to do public events face to face. So if you are able to make a small donation, that would be very, very welcome. Please remember to sign up online for any future events so you can be kept in touch with the work of the campaign and future meetings such as this. Then we have got a couple of live meetings coming up, in-person meetings coming up, just to let you know. First of all, at the Labour Party conference, if any of you are down there in Brighton on Monday the 27th of September at the Grand Hotel, in Brighton at 5:30. And I'm also really pleased to be able to announce tonight that the Latin America Conference, which is a wonderful conference looking at Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, Bolivia, Honduras, El Salvador, Brazil, Argentina, and so on and so forth, will be taking place this year in person at the Friends Meeting House in London on the 4th of December. So I hope to see as many of you as possible as we can there at that event. Finally, I would like to thank each and every one of you for joining with us this evening. And particularly, I'd like to thank all of our contributors, our speakers, Her Excellency the Ambassador, Barbara Montalvo, Nav Mishra, and everyone who gave such wonderful and inspiring messages to this meeting this evening. If you enjoyed tonight's meeting, it will be available on YouTube, and you'll be able to share it with friends and colleagues. I'd like to also thank particularly Natasha Hickman and Ryan Smith, who put a lot of work into getting this meeting together, and all the other staff and volunteers at the Cuba Solidarity Campaign. Thank you all once again for coming tonight, and I hope to meet many of you soon in person. Thank you all, and have a good evening.